She's dead to dad, my sister snapped at the will reading. Even her kid knows she's trash. My uncle laughed until my 10-year-old son said, "You forgot the video Grandpa gave me." The lawyer hit play, silence fell. Before we find out what was on that tape, drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from right now. I'd love to see how far this story travels. The cold hum of the ventilation system was the only sound I could hear over the pounding of my own heart. I walked into the room, holding my 10-year-old son Ethan's hand, feeling the chill of the polished marble floor seep through the soles of my shoes. This wasn't a family gathering. It was an execution. We were on the 40th floor of the Founders Tower in downtown Chicago, inside a glass-walled conference room that smelled of expensive leather and stale coffee. My father, George, had built this empire from the ground up, and this room was his throne room. Now, it felt like a tomb. Sitting at the head of the mahogany table was my uncle, Richard. At 55, he still wore his suits like armor, tailored to hide the softness of a life spent spending other people's money. He didn't look up when I entered. He just kept playing with a gold pen, clicking it rhythmically against the wood. Beside him sat my sister, Kayla, 29 years old and still scrolling through her phone like a bored teenager, oblivious to everything except her own reflection in the glass wall. She looked up briefly, her eyes scanning my outfit, a simple blazer and trousers I'd bought off the rack, and smirked. "Nice of you to join us, Savannah," Richard said, finally stopping the clicking. "Though I assume you're just here for the free coffee. We both know there's nothing else for you in this room." Kayla let out a short, sharp laugh. "Don't be mean, Uncle Richard. Maybe she needs gas money to get back to her little apartment." I didn't react. I didn't flinch. I just pulled out a chair for Ethan and sat down, keeping my back straight. I could feel the invisible chains tightening around my chest, the old, familiar urge to defend myself, to scream that I was worth more than their insults. But I stopped it. I looked at Ethan, who was watching me with wide, intelligent eyes. I didn't come here to beg, I told myself, the thought clear and cold in my mind. I came here to show him how to stand in a room full of hate and not let it touch you. I am breaking the chain of trauma today. He will not inherit my silence. Mr. Edward, the family attorney, sat at the far end of the table. He looked tired, his face a mask of professional stoicism. He opened a thick leather folder. "Shall we begin?" he asked, his voice devoid of emotion. "Please," Richard said, waving a hand dismissively. "Let's get this over with. I have a tea time at 3. Mr. Edward began to read. It was exactly what I expected. The liquid assets, $3.6 million, went to Richard and Kayla. The real estate portfolio, including the Skyview penthouse valued at over $4 million, went to them as well. The stock options, the vintage car collection, the artwork, all of it was divided neatly between the brother who had manipulated him and the daughter who had ignored him. And to my daughter, Savannah," Mr. Edward read, pausing for a fraction of a second, "I leave nothing. She has chosen her path, and she must walk it alone." Kayla actually clapped her hands together, a small, giddy sound that echoed in the silent room. "Finally," she whispered. Richard leaned back, a satisfied grin spreading across his face. "Well, Savannah, looks like you got exactly what you deserved. Nothing but memories." I sat perfectly still. I didn't check for their reactions. I fixed my gaze on Mr. Edward, and for a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of something in his eyes. Regret? Pity? It didn't matter. "Is that all?" I asked, my voice steady. "That's all," Richard sneered, "unless you want to take a pen as a souvenir. But be quick. Security is waiting to escort you out." I stood up, taking Ethan's hand. We walked toward the door, the sound of my heels clicking on the marble, the only answer I gave them. I could feel their eyes on my back, burning with triumph. They thought they had won. They thought they had broken me. But they were wrong. I wasn't broken. I was just waiting. Richard stood up, smoothing his suit jacket, with a finality that made my stomach turn. "Get back to your little nonprofit, Savannah," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "Before they fire you, too. God knows you can't afford to be unemployed again." He picked up a gold fountain pen, ready to sign the release papers that would transfer the entirety of my father's life's work into his hands. Kayla was already texting, probably posting about her new fortune. The air in the room was thick, suffocating. It seemed, for all the world, that the villains had won. They had the money, the power, and the last word. I watched Richard's hand hover over the paper. The scratching of the pen on the document would be the sound of my father's legacy dying. And then A small, clear voice cut through the silence. Grandpa said you'd try to sign before watching the movie. Ethan stood up from his chair in the corner. He didn't look like a bored 10-year-old anymore. He stood with his shoulders back, his chin high, the exact posture my father used to have when he was about to close a deal. In his hand, he held a Rubik's Cube. It was a cheap, plastic toy, its bright colors jarring against the dark mahogany and glass of the boardroom. Richard paused, pen still hovering. What did you say? Ethan walked forward, ignoring the glare. Richard shot him. He placed the Rubik's Cube directly in the center of the massive table. The clack of plastic on wood was deafening in the sudden quiet. With practiced ease, Ethan twisted the top row of the cube to the right, then popped off the center cap. From the hollow center of the toy, he pulled out a small, silver flash drive. Grandpa gave me this, Ethan said, his voice steady, his eyes locking with Richard's. He told me to give it to Mr. Edward when you tried to take everything. Kayla scoffed, though her eyes darted nervously to the drive. What is this? Some kind of joke? A 10-year-old with a spy gadget? Richard laughed, but it was a hollow, nervous sound. This is ridiculous. Savannah, control your son. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I just watched. Mr. Edward, who had been a statue until this moment, suddenly came to life. He reached out and took the drive from Ethan's hand. His movements were precise, respectful. He looked at the drive, then at Richard, a glint of something hard and satisfied in his eyes. I believe Mr. Edward said, his voice cutting through Richard's bluster, that Mr. George left specific instructions regarding a supplementary addendum. This appears to be it. You can't be serious, Richard sputtered, standing up. You're going to let a child dictate legal proceedings with a toy? Sit down, Richard, Mr. Edward said. It wasn't a request. Mr. Edward walked to the large screen at the head of the room and plugged the drive into the port. The screen flickered to life. A loading bar appeared. Richard looked at me, his face flushing red. If this is some kind of trick, Savannah, I swear, I will sue you for every penny you don't have. It's not a trick, I said softly. It's the truth. The loading bar hit 100%, the screen went black for a second, and then a face filled the frame. It was my father. The screen flickered, and then my father's face filled the frame. He was sitting in his home office, wearing a simple cardigan, not the tailored suits he wore to the office. He looked tired, his eyes heavy with a sadness I had never seen in life. But when he spoke, his voice was clear, sharp, and unmistakably him. This is the last will and testament of George Reynolds, he began, looking straight into the camera. If you are watching this, it means my brother Richard has just attempted to steal everything I built. The boardroom went so quiet I could hear the hum of the hard drive spinning. Richard had frozen, his face pale, his mouth slightly open. Kayla had stopped texting, her eyes wide with confusion. 5 years ago, my father continued, his voice heavy. I cut my daughter Savannah out of my life. I told everyone it was because she had betrayed the family, that she had turned her back on us. But that was a lie. He paused, taking a deep breath, as if the next words were physically painful to say. I didn't cast her out because I was angry. I did it because I was being blackmailed. A gasp escaped Kayla's lips. Richard slammed his hand on the table. This is a fabrication! A deepfake! Turn it off! Mr. Edward didn't move. He stood by the screen, arms crossed, a silent sentinel ensuring the truth was heard. My brother Richard, the video continued, had discovered a way to leverage my past mistakes against me. He threatened to destroy Savannah's career, to frame her for a corporate scandal he had orchestrated unless I removed her from the company and the will. He held my love for her hostage. On the screen, my father leaned closer to the camera, his eyes filled with tears. Savannah, he said, his voice cracking. My brave girl. I had to play the part of the angry father. I had to let you believe I hated you, because it was the only way to keep you safe from him. I watched you struggle from afar. I saw you leave the corporate world, saw you fight for people who had nothing, saw you raise Ethan with nothing but your own strength, and every day, it broke my heart that I couldn't help you. But I was the watchman. I had to stand guard in the shadows. I felt tears prick my eyes, hot and fast. For 5 years, I had carried the weight of his rejection. I had believed I wasn't enough, and all this time, he had been protecting me. He hadn't abandoned me. He had sacrificed himself for me. But a watchman doesn't just watch, my father said, his voice hardening again. He prepares. He held up a thick stack of documents to the camera. Richard thought he was controlling me. But while he was busy spending my money, I was busy gathering evidence. Every embezzlement, every fraudulent transaction, every bribe, it's all here. And it's all on the drive. My father looked at the camera one last time, a fierce pride burning in his eyes. So, to my brother Richard, you get nothing. To my daughter Kayla, I'm sorry I failed to teach you kindness. And to Savannah, everything is yours. The company, the assets, the house. But more importantly, the truth is yours. I love you. I have always loved you. The screen went black. For a moment, no one moved. The silence in the room was absolute, a physical weight pressing down on us. Then, the storm broke. That's a lie, Richard screamed, lunging for the laptop. It's all lies! He was senile, he didn't know what he was saying! Mr. Edwards stepped in front of the screen, blocking him. The video was authenticated by a forensic team this morning, Richard. It's admissible. Kayla stood up, her face twisted in a mask of fury and panic. Daddy didn't mean it! He loved me! I was the one who stayed! She turned to me, her voice shrill. You manipulated this! You and that brat! I studied them. I analyzed Richard, red-faced and sweating, looking for something to destroy. I observed Kayla, desperate and vicious, realizing her golden ticket was dissolving. They were loud, they were messy, they were terrified. And I felt a strange, cold calm settle over me. The anger I had carried for 5 years, the burning need for validation, it was gone, replaced by a clarity sharp enough to cut glass. I didn't need to scream. I didn't need to fight. My father had already won the war for me. I looked at Mr. Edward and gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. Mr. Edward pressed a button on the intercom console on the table. Send them in, he said. The heavy double doors at the back of the room swung open. But it wasn't family who walked in, it wasn't staff. It was a team of 4 men and women in dark suits, carrying briefcases and wearing badges. Behind them were 2 uniformed police officers. Forensic accountants. And the law. Richard stopped screaming. He looked at the police, then at the drive, then at me. And for the first time in his life, I saw true fear in his eyes. Savannah, he whispered, his voice trembling. What have you done? I didn't do anything, Uncle, I said. My voice calm, factual, lethal. I just watched the movie. The police officers moved with efficient precision. One read Richard his rights, while another clicked handcuffs onto his wrists. The sound was distinct, metallic, final. Richard, who had commanded boardrooms and destroyed careers with a single phone call, was now reduced to sputtering threats. Do you know who I am? He shouted, his face purple. I'll have your badges! I'll sue the department! This is entrapment! You have the right to remain silent, the officer said, unimpressed. I suggest you use it. Kayla stood by the table, her hands shaking so hard she dropped her phone. It clattered on the marble floor, the screen cracking, a perfect metaphor for her life. She watched the police march Richard toward the door, then turned slowly to look at me. Her eyes were wide, filled with a panic that was almost palpable. She looked at the empty chair where Richard had sat, then at the Rubik's Cube still resting on the table, and finally at me. Savannah, she said, her voice trembling. They're taking him away. What's going to happen? He's going to prison, Kayla, I said simply. Embezzlement, fraud, blackmail. The evidence is irrefutable. But what about the money? She asked, her voice rising in pitch. The penthouse? The accounts? Frozen, Mr. Edwards said from his spot by the screen. All assets tied to the estate are frozen pending the investigation. And since the revised will grants everything to Savannah, you have no claim to any of it. Kayla stared at him, then back at me. The realization hit her like a physical blow. Her lifestyle, her status, her future, it had all been built on Richard's theft and my father's silence. Now, it was gone. She rushed toward me, tears streaming down her face, ruining her perfect makeup. Savannah, please, she begged, reaching out as if to grab my hand. I stepped back. We're sisters. You can't let this happen. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know. You didn't know? I asked, my voice soft but cold. You didn't know why Dad cut me off? You didn't know why Richard was always whispering in his ear? Or did you just not care as long as the checks cleared? I was scared, she stammered. Richard said, he said you were dangerous. He said you hated us. And you believed him because it was convenient, I said. It was easier to believe I was the villain than to question where the money came from. Please, she sobbed, falling to her knees. It was a pathetic sight. The golden girl, the chosen one, begging on the floor of a corporate boardroom. I have nothing, Savannah. The credit cards will be declined. I can't pay my rent. I don't know how to do anything else. We're family. You have to help me. I evaluated the woman before me. The sister who had mocked my cheap clothes an hour ago, who had laughed when the will was read. And I realized something profound. She isn't powerful, I thought. She isn't superior. She's just empty. Without the money, without the protection of men like Richard, Kayla had no identity. She had no spine, no character, no resilience. She was a hollow shell painted in gold leaf. And now that the gold was stripped away, there was nothing underneath but fear. I didn't hate her anymore. I didn't even feel angry. I just felt a deep, exhausting pity. Get up, Kayla, I said. She looked up, hope flaring in her eyes. You'll help me? I reached into my purse. I pulled out a small, white business card and held it out to her. Here, I said. She took it, her hands trembling. She read the name on the card. Jameson and Associates Bankruptcy and Debt Restructuring. Her face crumpled. What is this? It's help, I said. I already helped you, Kayla. I didn't press charges against you. You're not going to prison. You're just going to have to learn how to survive, like I did. I turned to Ethan, who was watching everything with a solemn expression. He walked over to the table and picked up the Rubik's Cube. Ready to go, Mom? He asked. Yeah, I said, taking his hand. Let's go home. We walked out of the boardroom, leaving Kayla weeping on the floor and Mr. Edward closing the file on the Reynolds empire. I didn't look back. There was nothing there for me anymore. The wind off Lake Michigan usually bites this time of year, but as Ethan and I stepped out of the Founder's Tower, it felt surprisingly warm on my face. Behind us, the glass doors slid shut, sealing away the shouting, the police radios, and the crumbling ruins of my father's empire. Did I do good, Mom? Ethan asked, looking up at me. He was clutching the Rubik's Cube like a trophy. You did amazing, I said, squeezing his hand. You were the bravest person in that room. Even braver than you? Much braver? I smiled. In the weeks that followed, the fallout was swift and public. Uncle Richard's trial became a media circus, ending with a 10-year sentence for embezzlement and fraud. Kayla, stripped of her allowance and her penthouse, had to move into a studio apartment and take a job as a receptionist at a dental clinic. I heard through the grapevine she was actually good at it, once she realized no one cared about her last name. I didn't keep the money. Not all of it. I took enough to buy a modest house in the suburbs with a big backyard for Ethan and a sunroom for me. The rest, the millions Richard had tried so hard to steal, I used to endow the legal aid nonprofit I worked for. We opened the George Reynolds Center for Justice, a wing dedicated to helping families fighting corporate fraud. My father's legacy wasn't the tower or the money. It was the truth. One evening, months later, I walked into the living room to find Ethan sitting on the floor, solving the Rubik's Cube. The silver flash drive sat on the shelf above him, next to a framed photo of my father. Done! Ethan shouted, holding up the solved puzzle. I sat down beside him. You know, Grandpa would have been really proud of you. I know, Ethan said simply. He told me. I smiled, pulling him into a hug. The silence in our new home wasn't heavy or cold. It was peaceful. It was the sound of a life built on truth, not secrets. We were safe, we were free, and finally, we were home. Savannah proved that silence isn't always weakness, sometimes it's just loading the gun. If you've ever had to cut off toxic family to save your own sanity, leave a yes in the comments. And don't forget to follow for more stories about justice served cold.